At 31,000 feet, the cabin lights didn't even flicker when the first engine died. It didn't wind down or cough or give a polite warning either. It exploded like someone set off a bomb inside the wing. The whole jet snapped sideways. Luggage popped from overhead bins. Coffee turned into flying shrapnel, and one scream triggered 50 more. Up front, the captain didn't shout. He didn't pray on the intercom. He just said it in that steady voice pilots use when they're trying not to terrify you. "We've lost thrust. We are gliding now." A few seconds later, the second engine failed too, and that's when the sound disappeared. No roar, no hum, just wind tearing past the fuselage. 189 people suddenly realized something brutal. Planes aren't supposed to be quiet. The captain came back on, calmer than anyone had the right to be. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will not be reaching an airport. We are going to crash." Phones came out like weapons. Hands started shaking too hard to type. Strangers grabbed strangers. Some people prayed out loud. Some people just stared like their brain refused to accept the math. And then, through the cockpit speaker, a voice cut in on the emergency frequency. Small, clear, almost polite. "This is Sparrow. I can help." Two fighter pilots racing in from a nearby base heard that call sign and froze mid-flight. Because that name wasn't supposed to belong to a kid. It belonged to a legend, a family line whispered about in briefing rooms. But the voice was unmistakably a child's, maybe 11, maybe younger. And in that single moment, the entire story took a hard left turn. Before we jump in, comment where you're watching from, and tell me, if you were on that flight, would you trust a kid on the radio? It started as the kind of day nobody remembers. The airport was doing what airports do best, moving exhausted humans like luggage. Gate announcements blended into the background. Wheels clicked over tile. Someone argued with a suitcase that clearly didn't fit the rules, and the smell of burnt coffee hung in the air like a bad decision. Flight 602 to the West Coast was just another mid-afternoon hop. 4 hours of cramped legs, overpriced snacks, and pretending the person in the middle seat doesn't exist. People boarded with the same tired rhythm. Business travelers already angry at their inbox. Parents bargaining with kids using snacks as currency. Couples doing that quiet airport silence that means they've had too many trips together. And right in the middle of that normal, a small girl walked up to the gate podium like she was trying not to take up space. She wore a hoodie a little too big, sneakers that flashed when she stepped, and under her arm she carried a worn stuffed bird, the kind of toy that has clearly survived years of being squeezed during bad dreams and long car rides. One button eye slightly loose like it had seen things. The gate agent leaned forward with the practice smile adults use when they want a child to feel safe. "Hi, sweetheart. Traveling alone today?" The girl nodded, quiet and polite, the exact type of kid adults label as easy. She gave her name softly, the kind of name you'd forget 5 minutes later because nothing about her seemed like the start of a headline. The agent double-checked the paperwork, clipped on the little unaccompanied minor tag, and did the whole routine. "Stay with the crew. Don't wander. Press the call button if you need anything." The girl answered yes ma'am to everything, like she'd memorized how to make adults relax. Then the flight attendants took over at the aircraft door, swooping in with that warm, motherly energy they reserve for kids flying alone. "You're our VIP today," the lead attendant told her. "Very important person." They guided her down the aisle, past first class where nobody looked up, and into the middle of the cabin by a window. The attendant stowed her sparkly backpack carefully, like it contained crayons and cookies and not much else. "Buttons right here if you need me," she said, tapping the call light. "You're not alone on this plane." The girl smiled, thanked her, and buckled in. She placed the stuffed bird on the seat beside her and angled it toward the window like it deserved a view too. A man next to her opened his laptop and mentally filed her away as quiet kid, hopefully no drama. An older woman across the aisle offered her a piece of candy like every grandmother on earth shares the same operating system. The girl took it politely, tucked it away, and sat with her hands folded like she'd been trained to sit that way. To everyone watching, she was just a small kid doing a brave thing, flying alone, clutching a toy, trying to act grown up. Nobody noticed the way her eyes tracked movement outside the window, not like a tourist, like someone who instinctively measures distance and speed. Nobody asked why her posture looked less like nervousness and more like discipline. And nobody, not one person on that plane, had any idea that the most ordinary passenger on board was sitting right there, waiting for a moment she never wanted to come, but had been trained for anyway. What no one on that plane could see was that the quiet act wasn't shyness, it was camouflage. Inside that glitter-covered backpack wasn't just snacks and a tablet, and a paperback book meant to make adults nod approvingly. Buried underneath all of that was an aviation radio, not a toy, not a cheap gadget, a real one, tuned and ready, the kind pilots trust when everything else fails. There was also a worn flight notebook, its corners bent, pages soft from years of handling. Her name pressed into the cover like a promise someone made long before she understood what promises cost. And folded carefully inside were patches, old ones, new ones, fabric stitched with history, squadrons from different wars, different decades, different aircraft, all tied together by one call sign that kept reappearing like a family curse or a family blessing, depending on how you looked at it. The stuffed bird she carried wasn't random either. It wasn't picked from a store shelf because it was cute. It had been given to her during a ceremony where grown pilots stood straight and serious, where medals caught the light, where a child was handed something no child was ever supposed to carry yet. That bird was a symbol, a stand-in for a name that had flown through generations. Her great-grandfather earned it flying lumbering bombers through flak-filled skies, bringing planes home that had no business staying airborne, choosing his crew over himself every single time. Her grandfather carried it through another war, flying faster jets, surviving fire and captivity, enduring pain he never fully talked about, all because he refused to leave someone behind. And then there was her father, the last one, the one who flew the sharpest aircraft ever built, missions that never made the news, victories that never got headlines. 2 years earlier, his jet failed during what should have been a routine flight. The investigation later said he fought the aircraft longer than anyone reasonably could, steering it away from homes, from schools, from people who would never know how close they came to disaster. His final transmission wasn't fear, it wasn't regret, it was instruction. He told them to tell his daughter he loved her, and to tell her the legacy was hers now, because she was ready. He never got the chance to eject. After the funeral, after the folded flag, after adults whispered that she was so strong for her age, a group of pilots made a decision that stunned everyone else. They passed the call sign to her, not out of pity, not out of tradition, but because when they tested her, she didn't guess, she didn't hesitate. She explained systems, failures, and procedures like someone who had lived inside cockpits instead of classrooms. They didn't speak to her like a child that day. They spoke to her like a peer. So now, sitting halfway down a commercial jet, wearing flashing sneakers and holding a stuffed toy, she looked exactly like what everyone expected her to be. But behind the quiet voice and careful manners was years of training, loss, discipline, and a name that meant stepping forward when nobody else could. She never wanted to use it. She just needed to be ready if she ever had to. The plane pushed back like it always does, slow and casual, like the airport was saying, "Relax, this is normal." The captain's voice came over the speakers with that smooth confidence that makes people trust a stranger they'll never meet. Flight time just under 4 hours. Weather is clear at your destination. Sit back and enjoy the ride. And the cabin did exactly that. People surrendered to routine. Headphones went on. Screens lit up. Arguments died down. The lead attendant walked the aisle with the smile she'd practiced for years, checking belts, checking bags, checking faces for the ones who looked scared. When she reached the girl by the window, she leaned in with the same gentle tone adults use when they think they're translating the world for a child. "You doing okay, sweetie? First time flying alone." The girl turned from the window with a small, polite smile. "I'm fine. I like watching the climb. You can tell a lot by how smoothly they manage the power and pitch." The attendant laughed the way grown-ups laugh when a kid says something cute that they assume came from a movie. "Well, aren't you a little genius? I'll bring you some juice. Just enjoy the clouds." The girl nodded, thanked her, and looked back outside. Below them, the city shrank into neat little blocks. The lake turned into a sheet of steel, and other aircraft moved like silent chess pieces in the distance. Most passengers didn't notice any of it. They were already deep in their usual in-flight rituals. A man typed like the internet would collapse if he stopped. A couple argued in whispers about nothing and everything. A teenager leaned into the window with the hopeless patience of someone being dragged somewhere they didn't choose. And the older woman nearby unwrapped her candy slowly. Offering the girl another piece like kindness was something you could hand across an armrest. The girl accepted it, smiled, and tucked it away without eating it. Then she pulled out her tablet. To anyone glancing over, it looked like games, the kind of bright screen distraction parents rely on at 30,000 feet. But what she actually opened was a checklist, then a diagram, then a weather map with altitude winds, then a page of numbers most adults would mistake for homework. She wasn't playing, she was rehearsing. She scrolled like someone reviewing a language they refused to forget: engine failure on climb, electrical loss, fire procedures, glide profiles, energy management. Not because she expected anything to happen on a random weekday flight, but because the one person who mattered most in her life had drilled one lesson into her head until it became part of her breathing. You don't study because you want disaster, you study because disaster doesn't ask what you want. The cabin stayed calm. The aircraft climbed higher. The seatbelt sign clicked off. People relaxed into that false sense of safety we all rent when we fly. And in the middle of all that normal, the girl kept reading like she was waiting for a test the rest of the plane didn't even know existed. It happened so fast the brain couldn't file it as engine trouble. It filed it as attack. A violent bang ripped through the right side of the aircraft. Not a pop, not a shudder, an explosion that punched the cabin like a fist. The jet snapped hard. Bodies yanked against seatbelts. A rolling wave of screams burst out before anyone even understood why. Overhead bins sprang open like jaws. Bags tumbled into the aisle. A phone cart slammed sideways, and a drink arced through the air in slow motion before splattering across somebody's suit like the world's worst baptism. The flight attendant grabbed a seat back to keep from going down. Her smile wiped clean in 1 second, replaced by the look every passenger fears, the look that says she knows this isn't routine. Up front, alarms lit up like a Christmas tree from hell. The cockpit filled with sound, warning tones stacking on top of each other until it was pure noise. The captain fought the yaw with his feet, hands locked on the controls, while the first officer ran the checklist so fast her fingertips sounded like gunfire. They told air traffic control they had an engine failure and a fire indication, declared an emergency, asked for the nearest suitable airport. And for a tiny moment, that word nearest gave everyone a thread to hold on to. Because an engine-out emergency is scary, but it's still a problem airplanes are built to survive. Then the second engine died. Not gently, not gradually. It just wound down into nothing, like someone reached into the sky and turned the power off. The roar vanished. The aircraft didn't suddenly fall like a stone. It did something worse. It kept flying but wrong. The cabin went unnaturally quiet except for the wind, and that sound hit people's bodies before it hit their minds. Planes aren't supposed to sound like wind. The captain stared at the instruments like his eyes were betraying him. Both thrust levers useless, both engines gone, no restart, no power, just gravity and whatever lift they could squeeze out of the wings. His voice came over the intercom again, controlled, steady, the kind of calm that feels almost disrespectful until you realize it's the only thing holding the situation together. Ladies and gentlemen, we have lost both engines. No one moved at first, because both engines isn't something regular people have a mental box for. Then the reality broke loose. Crying, praying, frantic calls, hands shaking as people tried to text goodbye messages that kept coming out wrong. A man whispered his child's name like a prayer. Someone behind you said, "This can't be happening." Over and over like repetition could change physics. The crew moved through the aisle shouting brace instructions, checking belts, forcing their faces into calm while their eyes betrayed them. And then the captain said the sentence that turns an airplane into a countdown. "We will not reach an airport." A pause, one breath, the sound of wind getting louder. "We are going to crash." In the middle of row 14, the little girl stopped scrolling. She tilted her head like she was listening to the aircraft itself. And while everyone else was falling apart, she started doing the math, silently, fast, and with a look that didn't match her flashing sneakers at all. The cabin turned into a messy, human storm. People crying into their sleeves. People praying like the ceiling could hear them. People staring at their screens trying to type a goodbye that didn't sound ridiculous. And the crew, bless them, tried to do the impossible job: keep order inside a flying metal tube that had just become a glider. Stay seated. Seatbelts tight. Put your head down when we tell you. But panic doesn't listen. Panic does what it wants. That's when the girl finally moved, not like a scared kid, like someone who'd been waiting for a cue. She unbuckled, stood on the seat, and reached for the overhead bin. The lead attendant was there in 2 steps, grabbing her arm hard enough to mean it. No, 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 sweetheart, sit down right now, she snapped, the soft voice gone. We're in an emergency. The girl didn't flinch. She looked up at her with eyes that were too steady for her age. Ma'am, I need my bag, she said, calm like she was asking for a pencil in class. The attendant tightened her grip. That's not happening. You're going to get hurt. The girl lowered her voice, not pleading, commanding. Both engines are out. The pilots are gliding. They need options. For a second, the attendant just stared, because how does an 11-year-old say that like it's a weather report? The girl pulled her backpack down anyway, unzipped it fast, and lifted out a compact aviation radio, real equipment with a real antenna. The attendant's mouth opened. No sound came out. She looked like her brain tried to reject what she was seeing. You can't, she finally managed. That's not. The girl turned fully toward her, and the tone changed. Please listen, my dad was a military pilot. He trained me. I can help them land this aircraft. The attendant's face said it all, disbelief, fear, and the ugly truth that disbelief doesn't matter when you're running out of sky. Around them, nearby passengers went quiet, not because they felt better, but because the weirdest thing possible had just happened. A child pulled out a pilot radio on a dying airliner. The attendant swallowed hard, looked toward the front, looked at the shaking cabin, then back at the girl. And finally she let go. Do it, she whispered. Just do it. The girl clicked the radio on with practiced fingers, adjusted the dial like she'd done it 1,000 times, and tuned straight to the emergency frequency. Then she pressed transmit and spoke like a professional, short, clear, no drama. Flight crew of 602. This is Passenger Sparrow in the main cabin. I have relevant aviation emergency training. I'm monitoring emergency frequency if you need assistance. In the cockpit, the captain and first officer froze mid-checklist. Because that voice was a child's voice, but the delivery was clean, correct, and steady. The captain leaned toward the mic like he didn't believe he was doing this. Passenger Sparrow, this is the captain. Repeat your last. Back in the cabin, the girl answered instantly. I can assist with planning and coordination, sir. I've been trained. At the same time, miles away, 2 fighter jets had already been launched to support the emergency. A pair of stealth fighters cutting through the sky toward the gliding airliner, their pilots listening to the same emergency channel. When the call sign Sparrow hit their headsets, both of them went still. Not because it sounded cute, because it sounded impossible. That name, that kind of call sign, didn't belong to a random kid on a commercial flight. It belonged to a legacy, the kind you hear about in squadron bars, the kind tied to stories that end with salutes, funerals, and names carved into plaques. One of the fighter pilots keyed his mic, voice suddenly tight. Control, confirm that call sign, who just transmitted as Sparrow. A beat, then the answer came back through the data link. Unaccompanied minor on the manifest, child passenger, flagged family connection to a decorated military pilot. The fighter pilot stared forward in his cockpit like the sky had started lying to him. Because now they weren't just racing to escort an airliner. They were racing toward an 11-year-old who was talking to the cockpit like she belonged there. The moment the captain answered her, the room stopped being a cabin and turned into a command center. The girl didn't waste a second explaining who she was or why she sounded the way she did. She went straight to numbers. Sir, what's your current altitude and ground speed? The captain blinked, glanced at his instruments, and answered like instinct took over. Passing 8,000 feet, speed 220. She nodded to herself, already calculating, her fingers moving across the tablet, so fast it barely looked human. Okay, with your weight and configuration, your best glide puts you short of any runway in range, she said calmly. You need something long, straight, and flat. The first officer leaned closer to the radio, her voice sharp with focus. Are you saying we can't make an airport? Yes, ma'am, the girl replied. But you can make a surface. Silence filled the cockpit for half a second, then the girl spoke again. There's a north-south highway about 40 miles east of you, straight for over 10 miles, no major overpasses, minimal elevation change. That's your best landing option." The captain's eyes snapped to the navigation display, then to the first officer, then back again. "She's right," the first officer said quietly, tracing the line with her finger. "It's closer than the airport." Back in the cabin, nearby passengers leaned forward without realizing it, like they could pull the plane farther just by listening harder. The girls switched frequencies smoothly, like changing lanes on an empty road. "Any military aircraft monitoring this emergency? This is Sparrow." The response came instantly, deeper, older, controlled. "Sparrow, this is Raptor 1. We copy." The girl didn't hesitate. "Flight crew is attempting an emergency landing on Highway 94. Traffic must be stopped immediately. Emergency services needed along the route. We have approximately 10 minutes." There was a pause. Then the fighter pilot answered, his tone changing in a way that made the girl's throat tighten. "Copy, Sparrow. We are supersonic inbound. We will clear that road." Back in the cockpit, the captain swallowed hard. "Sparrow, we need help managing energy. We're fighting asymmetric drag. She wants to roll." "Trim it out, sir," the girl said, firm but calm. "Don't fight it with muscle. Use rudder trim in small steps and accept a crab angle. You'll waste altitude if you chase perfect alignment." The captain adjusted, felt the aircraft settle just a little, enough to matter. "That helped," he said quietly. "Keep talking." She kept talking. She called out headings, glide speeds, distances, counting down altitude like a coach counting reps. Passengers heard only fragments, numbers and short commands floating through the cabin, but the tone changed. People stopped crying, not because fear was gone, but because direction had arrived. Up above, the fighter jets sliced into position, their sensors tracking the powerless airliner, their pilots relaying clearance updates. "Highway is being shut down," one voice confirmed. "Law enforcement on scene." The girl exhaled once, slow and controlled. "Okay," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "We have a place to go now." And for the first time since the engines died, the plane wasn't just falling anymore. It had a target. The highway finally appeared ahead like a thin gray thread stitched across empty land. And from 30,000 feet, it looked ridiculous, like trying to land a whale on a sidewalk. The captain saw it too, and his voice came through the radio with a crack in it now. Not panic, just the raw edge of reality. "Sparrow, I've got the road in sight, but we're high and long, and if I aim straight in, we'll either overshoot the safe section or come down wrong." The girl didn't flinch. She didn't fill the air with comfort words. She gave him the one thing pilots need when fear shows up, a plan. "Copy. Sir, you're going to use your extra altitude like money. Spend it on positioning, not on hope." She tapped her screen, eyes locked, voice steady. "Extend speed brakes to about half, not full. You need a steeper descent without killing all forward energy." In the cockpit, the first officer hesitated just a beat, because this was an aggressive call for a heavy airliner with no engines, and it was coming from a child. Then she looked at the captain and said the only honest thing left. "We don't have a better option." The speed brakes deployed, and the jet immediately felt different. The nose dipped, the wind noise rose, the cabin angle shifted just enough for everyone to feel it in their stomach. A wave of cries surged again, because humans can handle fear, but humans hate change, and that change felt like the start of impact. The lead attendant grabbed the PA, and her voice cut through the cabin, sharp and clear. "No warmth now, no sugar, just survival. Brace position, heads down, stay down until we stop. Brace, brace." The girl squeezed the stuffed bird to her chest for 1 second, then put it in her lap and tightened her belt until it hurt. Back on the radio, the girl spoke fast, guiding the last chess moves. "Sir, you're going to pass over the highway first. Then do a controlled 180 to line up with the cleared stretch from the south end. You need the longest rollout possible." The captain stared forward, jaw clenched. "That's a big turn for this aircraft." "Yes, sir," she replied. "But you have altitude now, and you won't later. Fly it smooth, bank around 30 degrees, hold 220 until you're rolled out, then retract speed brakes and commit." For a breath, the cockpit went quiet, and then the captain said, "Okay, Sparrow, we're doing it. Stay with us." The airliner crossed over Highway 94, and people in the windows saw flashing lights below, police cruisers angled across lanes, fire trucks and ambulances staged like they were waiting for the sky to drop bodies into their arms. Then the captain began the turn. The aircraft banked left, slow and heavy, like a giant trying to dance on ice. Inside the cabin, loose items slid. People gripped armrests. Prayers turned into whispers. Whispers turned into silence. The girl counted softly into the mic, almost like she was counting heartbeats. Hold it, steady bank. Don't tighten. Don't chase. You're doing great. Keep your speed. The first officer called out altitude. Her voice clipped. 5,000 feet. 4,000. 3,500. The highway rotated in the windshield until it lined up, straight and empty. A dark ribbon stretching out like a runway that never asked for this job. Roll out now, the girl said. Ease it, don't snap it. The captain leveled the wings, and the first officer's voice cracked into something that sounded like disbelief. We're lined up. We're actually lined up. Good, the girl said. Now configure. Gear down. Flaps coming in stages. Do not dive for the pavement. Fly it like a normal landing as much as physics allows. The landing gear clunked down, loud enough for half the cabin to hear it. That familiar mechanical sound that usually means safety is close, but today it sounded like a gamble being placed. The plane descended toward the highway, faster than it should, lower than it should, but aligned, finally aligned. 2,000, the first officer called. 1,000. The lead attendant shouted again, voice carrying down the aisle like a whip. Brace, heads down, stay down. At 500 feet, the highway filled every window. Asphalt texture visible now, the edges too close, the lanes too narrow, the margin for error basically a joke. At 200 feet, the captain's breathing was loud in the mic, but his hands stayed steady. At 100 feet, the girl's voice softened, just slightly, not less professional, just more human. You've got it. Hold it. Don't force it. Let it settle. And then the wheels hit. Not gently, not gracefully, but controlled, solid contact. Tires screaming against hot road. The fuselage shuddering like it wanted to tear itself apart. The captain stood on the brakes. The aircraft rattled over imperfect pavement. Emergency vehicles racing alongside. Every passenger feeling the deceleration slam them forward as if the plane was trying to throw them out of their own skin. The smell of burning rubber filled the cabin. Somebody screamed again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was pure release. The speed bled off, 140, 120, 90, 60. The highway still stretched ahead, empty, waiting. 40, 20. And then, with one final shudder, the jet stopped, sitting on a rural highway like it had always belonged there. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved, because nobody trusted the universe that much yet. Then the cabin exploded into sound, crying, laughing, screaming, clapping, strangers grabbing each other like they'd been reunited after a war. And the girl in the middle of it all kept her head down for a moment longer, holding that stuffed bird, letting her breathing catch up to her body, because the hardest part of being brave is staying calm after you survive. For a moment after the stop, the aircraft felt unreal, like the world had paused to check if it was allowed to happen. Then one clap hit the air, then another, then the whole cabin erupted. Not polite applause, the kind of roaring, shaking release you only hear when people realize they were one decision away from dying. People sobbed into strangers' shoulders. Someone laughed like they'd lost their mind. A man kissed the top of his own hand and whispered thank you over and over. The lead attendant grabbed the intercom, her voice trembling but functional. Everyone stay seated for a moment. We are going to evacuate using the slides. Leave bags behind. I repeat, leave bags behind. Of course, 3 people immediately reached for their bags anyway, because humanity is consistent that way, even during miracles. The crew snapped them back to reality and moved fast, doors armed, handles pulled, and with a violent hiss the emergency slides inflated. One by one, passengers poured out onto asphalt that was never meant to hold a passenger jet, stepping into hot wind and bright sunlight, and the flashing red-blue strobe of emergency vehicles parked along both sides of the road. Kansas turned into a movie set. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cruisers, dust in the air, radios barking, paramedics catching people at the bottom of the slides and guiding them away like they were fragile glass. Most injuries were exactly what you'd expect when fear squeezes a body for 10 minutes straight. Bruises from seatbelts, sprained wrists from bracing, knees trembling like they forgot how to work, shock written all over faces like a second skin. But nobody was dead. Not one. The captain and first officer were last out, because that's the rule, and because some rules exist for a reason. When their feet hit the ground, and they looked back up at the aircraft sitting there on a two-lane highway, they both just stood still, like their brains refused to accept the picture. Then the captain remembered, and his face changed. "Where is the kid?" he said, voice sharp, scanning the crowd. "Where's Sparrow?" They found her a short distance away, small against a wall of uniforms and flashing lights, still clutching that stuffed bird, backpack on, eyes wide now that the adrenaline was draining. The lead attendant was beside her like a shield, one hand on her shoulder. The captain didn't walk up like a captain. He walked up like a human being who just got handed his life back. He dropped to one knee on the asphalt and hugged her, tight and long, like he was afraid letting go would make the miracle disappear. "You saved everyone on that plane," he said, voice breaking. "You saved my crew. You saved me." The first officer knelt too, staring at the girl like she was trying to solve a puzzle that should not exist. "How do you even know those procedures?" she asked softly. "How do you know any of that?" The girl swallowed, and for the first time her voice sounded her age, not weak, just young. "My dad taught me," she said. "He told me to always be ready." Up above, a pair of fighters ripped past in a low, controlled flyby, not showboating. A salute, a loud metallic bow in the sky. The lead attendant turned to the crowd and said what everyone was already realizing. "Listen, you need to understand. We're alive because the pilots flew this aircraft like champions." She paused, eyes wet. "And we're alive because that child helped them find a place to land." Heads turned. People stared. The businessman who'd ignored her earlier stepped forward with shaking hands and said the simplest sentence in the world. "Thank you." Then the older woman grabbed the girl and hugged her like she was hugging her own grandchild, whispering blessings into her hair. Phones were already up everywhere, recording, posting, calling, because no matter how traumatic the day is, the internet still demands proof. Within an hour, the story was out, a passenger jet on a highway, 0 engines, 0 fatalities. Within 2, helicopters were circling overhead, camera crews were sprinting across fields, reporters were talking into microphones with that excited tone they use when tragedy turns into spectacle. And the strangest part was this. The mechanical failure was huge news. The emergency landing was huge news. The investigation would be huge news. But the headline everyone wanted wasn't about turbine blades or systems redundancy. It was about the little girl with the stuffed bird. The one who spoke on an emergency frequency like she belonged there. The one who made grown fighter pilots go quiet when they heard her call sign. 3 days later, the world still hadn't stopped talking. Not because a jet landed on a highway. Investigations happen. Metal fails, crews train, reports get written. People couldn't let go of one detail, the voice. A child's voice on an emergency frequency, calm enough to cut through panic like a blade. So the military did what it always does when something becomes bigger than one moment. It turned it into a ceremony. A hangar was cleared out, chairs lined up, flags hung, uniforms pressed, and the passengers who could make it came back. Not because they love travel, but because when someone saves your life, you don't just text a thank you and move on. You show up. The 2 fighter pilots stood at the front in dress uniforms, serious faces, polished shoes, the kind of posture that says this isn't for cameras, this is for meaning. The girl walked in wearing something simple, jeans, a neat shirt, and the same flashing sneakers. Because if you've carried a legacy through a disaster, you've earned the right to wear what you like. The base commander spoke first, briefly, because nobody there needed a long speech to understand what happened. Then one of the fighter pilots stepped forward holding a small patch case. Inside was a custom squadron patch, an image of a fighter in formation with a passenger jet, and beneath it words stitched in bold thread. "Sparrow has the con." He knelt so he was eye level with her, not talking down, talking straight. "In aviation, when we say you have the con, we mean you have control," he said, voice steady. "And on that day, you took control of the only thing that mattered, getting people home." Then he saluted her, full formal salute. An adult combat pilot saluting a child, not as a gimmick, as recognition. The girl returned the salute perfectly, because that part was muscle memory, drilled into her long before any of this happened. And then protocol cracked in the best way. Because the pilot pulled her into a hug, the other pilot hugged her too. And then the airline captain and first officer stepped up and wrapped her in the kind of embrace that doesn't say hero. It says, "Thank you for letting my kids have their parent back." Behind them, the passengers rose, every single one. A standing ovation that went on too long for politeness and too long for comfort, because nobody knew how to stop clapping for being alive. That night, she finally got a quiet room, a borrowed laptop, and a moment where nobody was asking her to be brave. She called her grandmother. The screen lit up with an older woman's face that had already cried every tear the news could pull out of a person. "Baby," her grandmother said immediately, voice shaking. "Are you okay?" The girl nodded, and the moment she did, her throat tightened, because she could hold steady for pilots and passengers and soldiers. But family hits different. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm just tired." Her grandmother leaned closer to the camera like she could reach through it. "I saw everything," she said. "The whole world saw it." The girl looked down at the stuffed bird in her lap, the worn fabric, the loose eye, the thing that had been just a toy to everyone until it wasn't. Then she asked the question she'd been carrying since before the plane ever took off. "Do you think Dad would be proud of me?" Her grandmother didn't hesitate. She didn't give a motivational quote. She didn't soften it. She told the truth like it mattered. "Yes," she said, tears running freely now. Not proud like a stranger saying good job. Proud like that man would have felt his chest crack open from it. The girl's eyes filled, and this time she didn't fight it, because she'd already done the hard part. "I miss him," she said, small voice, finally just a kid again. "I know," her grandmother replied. "And you'll keep missing him, because love doesn't stop, it just changes shape." After the call ended, the room went quiet. No sirens, no radios, no cheering, just a child sitting on a bed with a stuffed bird and a patch and a weight older than her years. She stared at the patch for a long time. And maybe that's the real ending of this story, not the landing, not the applause, not the headlines. A legacy isn't magic. It's work, it's discipline, it's being prepared on a random day when the universe decides to test everyone. And on that day, the most prepared person on board wasn't the loudest, wasn't the strongest, wasn't even in the cockpit. It was a quiet kid by the window, who proved that sometimes courage doesn't roar, sometimes it speaks clearly into a radio and says, "I can help."